Welcome to the University of the Free State.
Wa amohelwa ho University of the Free State.
Welkom bij de Universiteit van de Vrijstaat.
Siyakwamukela eNyuvesi yase-Free State.
Situated in the heart of South Africa, my university is the creation
Program
of
Director for this very concise yet important program that we're having here today in commemoration of Heritage Day. When I first read the title of the book, although I have not gone through the contents, I began to appreciate the importance of such figures as the person on the title of the book, because in order for you to know where you are, you need to know where you come from. And in order for you to know where you're going, you need to know where you are. So my first ideas around this book is that it is one of those materials that let us find our path in regard to where we were in the past, where we are currently, and where we could possibly go for the near future. So I'm very excited to be here, and may you please give yourselves a round of applause for making time to be here. All right, with that said, allow me to welcome Professor Diana Precious. She is the head, basically, of the Humanities Faculty at the Qwaqwa Campus. She is the Assistant Dean of the Humanities Faculty at the Qwaqwa Campus to give us her welcoming remarks. Can you please welcome her with a round of applause?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we waited for the program to begin. I was originally asked to do the closing remarks, and unfortunately the person doing the opening has a meeting now with very important international stakeholders, so we're sort of swapping roles. But I just wanted to thank you for spending your afternoon with us. It's always a joy to be able to celebrate and promote important literature. And so I would like to most importantly welcome Nthebe Molope and thank him for preserving this important piece of history. We're very much looking forward to hearing your presentation and the readings that you're going to give for us. Thank you for bringing this work to the Qwaqwa Campus as well. So a lot of times a book launch happens here or it happens in Bloom, but rarely both. So thank you for including us in your plans. And I just wanted to say, I know on the Bloemfontein campus, this book launch was the joint effort of social work, the Department of Social Work, and the Department of History. And on the Qwaqwa campus, I just want to give a special thank you to the Center for Gender and Africa Studies for their efforts in hosting the event on this side. So I encourage you to sit back and enjoy the presentation that you're going to hear, and then afterwards join us for some light refreshments to continue the conversation. But welcome wholeheartedly to our audience and to our author here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Precious. Back where I come from, if you have been welcomed into someone's house, then you can begin to enjoy the space and make it yours as well. So thank you very much, Professor Precious. Ladies and gentlemen, we were supposed to have a talk on the value of heritage to sort of give context to the overall celebrations that are happening across the country. But unfortunately, Professor Ncube is late. Perhaps we will have that at a later point. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the author of this wonderful book to come give us a reading. I will start with a brief biography. Nthebe Molope is a life teacher and alumni of the Vista and Wits universities who heralds out of the hot, dry, yet bucolic village in northwest called Ramolope in Moruleng. He released his debut book, An Evolutionary Review of Black Education in 2018. He further published Mateng Teng, A History of the Molopes in 2023. Molope considers the latest offering, King Mzilikazi KaMashobane, to be like an African storytelling abyss and an initiation to deep mythology with history combined. His hope is that the lessons derived from the story will invigorate us in charting our way forward without forgetting to remember lessons from the past. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Nthebe Molope.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know normally these mics are meant for people not of my, ba e leng hore ba kategile mono ka Setswana. Good afternoon, and my sincere apologies for having delayed you to end up starting this late. I detest late starting myself. I always want to have things starting on time, but there was dramas I endured from this morning. It was just drama all the way. I was even saying it may have even been better if I had overnighted this site and then leave almost immediately after. But as they say in French, c'est la vie. I am of the bad habit of not writing notes and taking notes out of my head. So if I happen to say things that are not in line, I'm sure you will put me back to line. The gentleman here spoke of something very profound, which comes out of John Henry Clark. John Henry Clark says, history is a compass that puts us and reminds us where we are in the geographic and historical time of day. So if you want to know where you are in your historical and political and geographic time of day, you must look to history. Where you come from, and you will never be able to know clearly where you're going to if you don't know where you come from. The other day I was saying there's an African idiom which says when a man falls, he does not look at where he fell, but he looks at what tripped him. So he looks back from where he comes from. With those few words, I want us to link directly into the subject of the day. I have been taking a tour on this book, Mzilikazi KaMashobane. Thank you very much. And have been in different venues, and what I try and do in those different places is connect the area where I am with the story. Now here in Qwaqwa, how far is Botabote from here? How many kilos? Sorry? How many? How many kilometers is Botabote from here? It is less than 100. So we don't have a exact, eh? Okay, the reason I'm asking is that Mzilikazi passed here at Botabote. And incidentally, the name was given after Queen Mantatisi was attacking the area. The queen who was known to be a fierce fighter, Wabasiya. And when she attacked the Basotho, Bar Arbote, who bota king agrega Sotho. Jwale be ba bota he. Ya le tulo be bitso hore ar ba bothe hore ba ske ba bonwa ke Mantatisi hantse a hlasela jwale. Ele pete ka nako eo because lepoqo la sentse a le monyana ke re la tseba lepoqo ke mang? Letlama. Moshwashwa ilane. Moshweshwe. Ke ena letlama lepoqo. Jwale he ba be ba botha tulo be ba bitsa ka hore ke Botabote. Now, when Mzilikazi attacked in this area, he was trying to encircle the area of the mountain to be able to access where Moshweshwe was. But Moshweshwe then was. And an interesting thing that then happened was that when he was getting frustrated and trying different areas to see how he could access and go to the top, and Moshweshwe continuously rolling boulders, he decided that then he must give up on this thing. It's just not working. So Moshweshwe did something very interesting. He went down sent men down the hill to go and meet Mzilikazi and gave him cattle and sheep and said, maybe it's hunger that's driving you to do this. And Mzilikazi said, well, now from now on you are my friend and I will never attack your area again. And that's what happened. And now the story that we get from the elders is that Mzilikazi did not only go away with sheep and cattle, but that some men joined him and became part of the troop that left with Mzilikazi. Today in Zimbabwe, you find Bakwena. In fact, some of the people that I was launching the book with in Johannesburg, by Pizza Bakwena ba Mzilikazi, and they know their parental lineage come from Lesotho. Now that's an interesting part about what has happened to the history and the journey of Mzilikazi almost throughout. Because one of the things that I mentioned right at the outset of the book is that the reason that I got to write the book was to ensure that we can get our history to be properly represented. It can be reflected in the manner that it happened, because the people who had been writing our history previously had been missionaries, had been traders, had been slavers. And there is no way that you can expect any of those people to write the history in a way that will suit the next person that they are writing for. And so, which is why in most of the research that we found, there's a lot of contradictions in terms of what comes from the ground and what is written in secondary and primary literature that is there about Mzilikazi. And this is a challenge that everywhere and wherever, especially if you are students of history, that if you want to look at the historicity of people and of events, it is important that you must get into the habit of researching and finding the truth and testing it against the reality that you find on the ground. Because there is no way that you can just be receivers of information that is meant for you. It is important that that history must actually be tested against what is there on the ground. Now, I'm not going to be long because I want to allow you to ask the questions. Maybe if you've got some trick questions, I probably will have some trick answers. Yeah, but the whole idea is that we must interact. I don't see this as a way of instructing, but as an opportunity to share information. Now, when I was at the Bloemfontein campus, one lady asked a very interesting question. And I think I part answered the question. When I was driving back, I was thinking, yeah, I think I gave part of the answer. Because the question she asked was, what is it that I found interesting in the journey of the research of the story? Because I researched this story for 5.5 years. It's like a crazy person. And I followed the paths and the different places that Mzilikazi went to. On Friday last week, I was on SAFM, and one lady called after I had said that Mzilikazi went through Mozambique into Eswatini, then into South Africa. And she was saying, no, but Mzilikazi never went to Mozambique. So my question was, what is your source? Where do you get that information, that he never went into Mozambique? Because I went there, and I asked people on the ground, and they confirmed. And what is even worse, if you go into Swaziland, where next to the border between Swaziland and Mozambique, there's a village called Mzilikazi. Now, African people don't name things like that out of the sky, that they just give a name. There's a particular significance. You know, there's an expression in Zulu, they say, "Kwahamba madoda wasali ibongo." Heard about that? Because those oral traditions, lezwe ibongo, are having a lot of history in them. Unfortunately, our youth today think that we are wasting time when we do ibongo. You know, they think our level of insanity has gone up. But that's where your history is contained. If you listen to how, when people speak and what they confirm, the routes that Mzilikazi traveled is in his own oral tradition. Now, anyway, the second part of the answer that I was to give, because I gave that lady the issue, I told him about, told her rather about the how Mzilikazi interacted and dealt with positioning his troops, because he positioned his troops in such a way that those right at the front were fierce warriors. And then if those ones were getting defeated, because he learned this also out of Shaka, Umlilwana, Udlungwane Kandaba, because he would place people like that right at the forefront who were warriors and who were fierce warriors, so that if you defeat those ones, the ones at the back are watching and they immediately relay the message to the king to say that, hey, those guys are strong. Looks like they're coming for us. And so that was one of the things that I found. But the other thing that I found, which was interesting, is that Mzilikazi had a relationship with Robert Moffat, the missionary who came from Scotland. Now, but this relationship was very interesting because the two people had different interests in ensuring that they established this relationship. Robert Moffat, like all other missionaries, wanted an area where there was a lot of people who were settled together because he wanted to convert them. Mzilikazi wanted Robert Moffat so that he can get guns from Robert Moffat, because he knew that guns were in the hands of white people. And so he wanted to access those guns by getting himself befriended to Mzilikazi. So this is a funny relationship, that there are two people who have got a specific interest, but not necessarily an interest which was going to help the interest of the one person, but it was their personal interest. And what is also interesting is that Mzilikazi's firstborn son, Nkulumane, was named after these interactions between Robert Moffat and Mzilikazi. So Nkulumane is so called because, you know, in the Nguni language there's a problem with the R. So because Mzilikazi had actually gone and worked in Kuruman. So now in the Nguni language it is called Nkulumane, for that Kuruman, where this firstborn son was actually birthed after Mzilikazi had actually returned. And this links to the issue of the naming and names, like I was saying, because Peter Becker, who wrote a book called Path of Blood about Mzilikazi, was saying actually Mzilikazi means the path of blood. But he couldn't have been more wrong, because Mzilikazi is a big road, a huge road. But how he was named by his father, uMashobane, because Mashobane was a fierce fighter. That's why in the praise songs they say Mzilikazi shoba shoba elinjengo yise, just like the father. Now, Mashobane had gone hunting, and he was injured by one of the animals that he was hunting, and he was bleeding profusely from his shoulder, apparently. And when he got home, met his wife, and the wife said, well, we've got a boy who's just been birthed. And he said, no, that will be Mzilikazi. Mzila wegazi lami. Mzila wegazi KaMashobane. He is the trail of my blood that has actually been oozed from where I was. And that's how he got to be called Mzila wegazi KaMashobane. And later it was cut down to be called Mzilikazi. So I don't want to go to be long. Like I said, I want to allow you to ask the questions, if you may, unless if you want me to continue talking. I take instructions from you.
Okay, let me intervene. All right, colleagues, I'm sure you've heard the interesting snippets of the book. Are there any questions at this point? Well, I've got one question in particular. What is the relationship between Shaka and Mzilikazi? Yeah.
Yes.
Perhaps to break the ice.
Yeah. Interesting. Firstly, you must note that Shaka was a very fierce warrior. And Shaka was not his name. That was a nickname. His name was Mlilwana, Little Fire. And that's a name that, if you were watching Ilembe, you'd see that Nandi from time to time used to say Mlilwana. Because she believed that this guy is going to grow to be a big fire. Usase Mlilwana kwamanje. And you know, in the praises ka Shaka, they call him Ilembe. Malembe ngokhalipha, because he was sharper than any other axe that you could think of. Now, Shaka was feared and worshipped in that way. But Mzilikazi joined because Shaka was of the Zulu lineage, yabo Malandela, right? Nabo senza ngakhona. And they were under the Mtetwas of Dingizwayo. Dingizwayo's real name was Godongwane. Now, after he tried to remove his father from the throne, and his father tried to kill him, he ran away and became a wanderer. And a wanderer in the Nguni language is Lord Dingizwayo, the one who's looking for his real home. Now, uDingizwayo, upon coming back, and wabuyiswa umthethwa, rather Langalbalele. I don't know if you know about Langalbalele. Our history, it's in trouble. Our history is challenged. Nevertheless, uDingizwayo, when he heard that his father had passed, he went back to his home, and it took over the reign, the power. Now, one of the reasons that uDingizwayo had a problem with his father was that it was a common practice that if you were a weak king, you had to pay a tribute. You had to pay something to a king that will be protecting you. And that is what Dingizwayo's father was doing. And Dingizwayo was saying, but no, Unyamboze, who was the great father, was a very strong king, and he actually used to protect other people. Now, you have now become subservient to those people, and you are now paying a tribute and getting people to protect you. It mustn't be. You know, we must get back to the same stature and respectability of Nyambos. And when the father heard that, he said, this son is out of order. I think I must just finish him. And so the son ran away. But after the father died, he came back. Now, his growing up was similar to that of Shaka. Because remember, Shaka, Unandi was a fierce woman. It is said that one of the days when she was at in the area where the women were staying in Wiscol, she hit one of the women with a stick on the head when she was trying to give her instructions. She said, I'm not taking instructions from little children. Now, Nandi was ultimately banished. You know, she came from Elangeni, and she was ultimately banished from KwaZulu. And so she stayed with Shaka and the little sister in the wilderness. And now Dingizwayo saw Shaka in the same way as himself, that he grew up in the wilderness, and here is Nandi also growing up Shaka growing up in the wilderness. But he found Shaka to be a very brave young man who did not care to get injured or to die. And so Dingizwayo said, no, I will mentor this guy and I will make him a better person. Now, during that whole time, there was a contestation between because there were paramount kingdoms. The Mtetwas was a paramount kingdoms under whom Zulu was. Then on the other side, there was Zwide, who was a paramount king, under which there was the Kumalos. Now, the Kumalos were three. There was Upeje, there was Mashobane, and who was the third one? Disappoint me. Disappoint me and give me the name. Sorry? Pardon? Who? No, umtunga wokhumala. Umbolazo omnyama. Ubhejo wasengoma. Sorry? No, Uzwide was the paramount king, under whom there were different other smaller kings, like Umanukuza. Manukuza is a person they call Soshangani. Soshangani is a nickname again. So you'll see this whole thing of the nickname actually goes very far. Oh, Ntombazi was the mother to Zwide, the Isangoma. Yeah, Ntombazi was the mother to Zwide. I'm not writing that book. Ne? All I know is that she was a Sangoma, a very strong Sangoma. But Begakombi Zulu net. And in fact, in KZN, even up to now, there's a school that has been made in memory of the type of things she used to do. And in fact, what then happened, which comes back to your question about Mzilikazi no Shaka, Umlilwana was 3 years older than Mzilikazi. One was born in 1797, the other one was born in 1780. Now, what then happened is that Uzwide, because was quite a power-hungry person and a very fierce person, and bagathembe umama uNtombazi, because uNtombazi bekamnika izinto. So ekwazi ukuthi maye empini, you would come back and be victorious. But now, when Zwide, because there was this fierce fight, and which is one thing that you must also place into context to this history. Remember that on the east coast, which is around the Mozambique and Tanzania and the Kenya, Mombasa area, there was a big trade between China and Africa. From those years ago, I mean, if you look at the story of Mapungubia, you can see the type of trade that was happening between China and Africa. And they used to use what was called the reverse winds, because these winds were blowing one way for 6 months, and then for the next 6 months, they were blowing up the other way. So when they were blowing into Africa, they would actually trade, and they would stay there for those 6 months. And then after 6 months, when they reverse, they will go back with them. Now, Uzwide had monopoly and access to the Portuguese that had already come onto the east coast. And so, because of the location, if you look at the history, or rather geography, you'd see that there is what they call the black Mfolos Omnyama, and the white Mfolos Omhlope, which is basically one river, but it splits out. So the Zwide was located next to Umfolozi Omnyama, and the people of Zulu were located next to Umfolozi Omhlope. And now they had access, because if you know the location, the locality of those people, is that there's a place called Jozini, which is northern KwaZulu-Natal, which is actually closer to Mozambique And which takes you to that story, like what I was saying about where Mzilikazi went to. Because he knew that route very well. From Umhlabu Yalingana, Ejozini, there's a whole lot of those different places. But nevertheless, what happened is that a treaty was attempted, so that Mthethwa under Utingizwayo and the Ndwandwes under Zwide can try and meet and make peace. But when Mthethwa Tingizwayo came there, Zwide killed him. And now basically was killing Shaka's hero. And so Shaka wanted to go and follow up and protect and fight on behalf of Zwide. And he was met by Mashobane, Mzilikazi's father, who said to him, you must not go and try and fight with Zwide. He's too powerful and you are still a young man. He'll kill you. So some people saw Mzilikazi talking to Shaka and blocking him. And they went to the king to say that Mashobane has spied on us. And so the king called Mashobane to come and account. And when Mashobane arrived there, he killed him. So now you are sitting with a situation where Mzilikazi grew up under Zwide because he was his grandfather. Because Ntomba's daughter was married by Mashobane as a way of trying to make peace. But it never worked. But so after Mashobane was killed, Mzilikazi decided he's not going to stay there with his father's killer. And he felt unsafe. And so he decided that he'll rather go and join his enemies, which is Ushaka. So this is where this relationship started. Ushaka no Mzilikazi, staying together. But the interesting thing is that Mzilikazi did not really see Shaka as a king. He saw him as his age mate. And he just decided he's not going to be taking a lot more instructions from this guy because this is my age mate. And anyway, Tina, Kumalo, we are much bigger where we come from. We are under Zwide, yes, but in number, we are much bigger than the Zulu, who are under Mthethwa. And so that is why he decided to despise Shaka. And when Shaka sent him to go and get cattle from Rampisi or Sompisi, or Ranisi or Sompisi, he came with them, but he decided he'll just give Shaka the thin cattle. All the other fat cattle he'll keep for himself. And that's where Shaka decided, no, I must punish this man. And Mzilikazi dared him. He said, no, if Shaka wants to meet me, he can meet me in peace. But if he wants to meet me in war, I'm waiting. And people were surprised. And this was not the first time, because there was a time when also Ushaka had offered Mzilikazi meat. And when you listen to Isbongo, it says, wa lukudla inkomo inyama kwabulawayo. Yes, wa lukudla umlenze kwabulawayo. So, but he refused to do that because he said, you are giving me the hind leg of a cow, which is normally reserved for women. So what are you saying about me? And now he's saying this to a guy who is feared. And what is interesting, and which is something that even in my research all the time I was asking, why is it that Shaka did not go and chase after Mzilikazi? After Mzilikazi left, he never chased him. And so many people could not answer. And I said to them, well, my view is that Shaka was a warrior and he was a tactician. And he didn't want to get embarrassed. Because imagine if he had gone to challenge, because he sent the first news, the smaller ones. And Mzilikazi dealt with them quickly. And he sent the next group, Izimpol. And Mzilikazi dealt with them. And he said, hey, this thing is becoming a little bit too much. And that's when afterwards he made way. And he went into, because he used the route that he knew best, which was the one into Mozambique, and went through Eswatini back into South Africa. I hope I've answered in a long way.
This is a grand opportunity to to ask any and everything that you'd like to know about Mzilikazi KaMashobane and all the nuggets of history therein. I will take the first round of 5. I'll start with you, Dr. Nzima. Then I'll come to you, Mfowethu. Any others at this point? Then you'll be number 3, and then you'll be number 4, and number 5, in that order.
Thank you very much, Nthebe Molope. I'm quite happy because this history is being written by us Africans, and this is a job well done.
Thank you.
And before coming here, I was reading some reviews of the book. Unfortunately, I have not read the book. I would like to read it. And I saw a review by Gajen that was quite good, and I already immediately knew it's a it's a well-packed book.
Thank you.
I have got 2 questions on something that I struggle to understand, and I appreciate that you've done the research. You probably have come across this. When we give praises to Inkosi Mzilikazi, we say, umfishane wakithi onjoba zinyathelo, ezabade ziyanyathelo, ezabade ngushaka kasenza ngakhona, ezabade nguzida kalanga. So now, this brings me to the question, what is the role that Mzilikazi played in defeating a person like Zwide, for starters? When we say ezabade ngushaka kasenza ngakhona, I understand that because of this sort of like sibling rivalry or friendship rivalry that they had, and the disrespect and all of that, that he could dare Ushaka. But when it comes to the defeat of Zwide, what was his role in that? And my second question is whether in your book do you touch on other things, the way of life, because they were moving, from place to place. Most of the works that we read portray Mzilikazi as a very violent person who always caused disruption, who was always fighting, and they often also link it to his name. But how were they surviving? Were they farming along the way? Were they trading along the way? What was the way of life? How were they celebrating along the way? Or did they even have time for those things? Or they only fought? So, in other words, I want to understand whether you captured that history of life outside the warrior nation that the Ndebele grown to be known as. Thank you.
Okay. Remember I said I'm not of the habit of writing. I do what my forefathers did. When they taught me Itagazelo, the grandfather said to me, come, gave me first few lines. He says, you'll come back when you know these lines. So there was no writing. So I'm taking up that habit. So if I can answer your second question first. The interesting thing, if you compare that with uManukuza, Soshangane. uManukuza, when he attacked the Ronga Tonga people. Because Ronga Tonga Tsongas are actually quite related, right? This whole notion of Shangan came much later, and it was also seen as an insult, almost like the name Shaka. Now, uManukuza, as a person who came out of that whole group of people that were under Zwide, together with Zwangendaba, Ngaba, Mashobane, and so on, all of them had a very interesting art in war, and which is what they focused on. Now, if you can remember also that the culture of circumcision in Zululand was finished by Udingizwayo. Right up till today, the men in Zululand don't go for circumcision, because Mtetwa said, this thing here in 4 months, 6 months, we are becoming depleted here in the battlefield. Let's finish this thing, and he banned it. And now, so if you look at that and you look at what was happening with Soshangani, Manukuza knew that those people, remember I said earlier that there was a lot of trade in the East Coast. So, and which is something that is unique, which is a discussion for another day, which is quite unique about what the Chinese have done over the years. I still need to see a country that is colonized by China, because the Chinese were mainly into trade. And when they came, they traded on the East Coast. Now, the Tsonga, Ronga, Tonga people were mainly doing a lot of things with their hands and trading and farming. So when Umanukuza attacked them, he found people who were basically defenseless because they had no skill of fighting and so on. They had a skill in trade. And that's why he dominated them. And look at how far he went. He went deep into Mozambique. That's why even today in Mozambique, there's a place called Gaza, which he named after his grandfather, because his name is Manukuza Kazikote Kagaza. So Gaza was his grandfather, and he named that place, also finding people who were basically not standing up to war. So he was, and that's why this nickname they say when he said, Uzo Shaingan, because he was just seeing them as children as he was going and clapping them all along. Now, almost the same thing. I know in some of the history amongst Botswana, they had a way of storing grain. And one of the ways of storing grain was they would dig up and they put the big calabash pots, because they keep things cool, and they'll keep the grain in there and they'll put it in the ground and they will cover it and they'll put some grass and so on. Because during the farming seasons, Mzilikazi did not have time for that. And so on. Like, guys, we are being attacked here in Nanyolima and you are having fun. So, but he knew that whenever he got into war, that one of the first things he would do is that there were people who were designated, because you must remember, even within the history of African people, the people who were normally in the farming place were women, because they knew the land very well. And they knew how the seasons, because the women also have got seasons themselves. So that is the reason that in terms of the connection of the land and women is so profound. And so they're the women who would be doing that. But what is interesting is that if you look at Abakulus in Natal, there were women warriors, like Abom Kabai. They were women warriors. They had no time for any other thing but to defend the land. Now, so the way of life that Mzilikazi made was that he was perfecting his systems of warfare and over the protection of the land. Because, make no mistake, he was aware, and it was generally a thing that people were aware of, which is why in the first part of the book I talk about two theories which I dispel. The empty land theory and Mfekani Difakani. Because there is no common understanding and a common path that is understood about this whole thing of Mfekani Difakani. About where and how it happened. There's about 4 or 6 theories about what this thing and how this thing was and how it came about. There is no commonality in terms of what was happening. And one of the strongest one was provided by Julian Coben in his PhD study, that Mfekani was an alibi, that people were actually searching and looking for slaves and enslaving them. And so when people were running away from that part of being captured as slaves, then it was said that it is Difakani. Now, so yes, in terms of the second part, that is what Mzilikazi did. Remember that cattle was a form of finance. It was money. And so he was basically gathering as much of that as possible. And that's why everywhere he went. And even with the people that actually came and submitted to him, he was giving them a price to say, this is the price for you to come and be part of that. Because when they were moving, there were so many that you would never even see, be able to count them. And so that was the major issue that he was concerned with, in addition to the notion of having and establishing a defensive state. Because my argument is that there were about 4 defensive states that were established. Shaka, not Dingizwayo, was actually a defensive state. Because remember, the Portuguese, when they came here, they took a lot of slaves out of Mozambique. And they say at one stage, Mozambique was almost depleted of its populace, because people were taken from Mozambique and were taken to Brazil to be slaves, to work in the sugar cane. And which is why, even today, you'll find that Brazil in South America is one country in the continent that has got the largest number of African people that are there. They were taken out of Mozambique, they were taken out of Venda, because Albacini, who was actually known to have been going right deep into Venda and taking people into Mozambique to be transported to the coast to be taken to Mozambique. So yeah, that's the first part. The second question, which was rather your first question, let's rehash it again. Mzilikazi. Oh yes. If you look at Peter Becker, as well as Ritter, both of them in their book state that when the greybeards talk about the role of Mzilikazi in terms of the defeat at Qwaqwa was absolutely paramount. Because remember the 2 things. I spoke about Untombas and Amatambo, because that was critical. In fact, one of the people that I interviewed had said that when Mzilikazi went over to join Ushaka, wahamba nenja futhi. And inja le yayisetshenziswa kakhulu. And kwekuyinja bekhanja nayo every time when they would go into war. Now, that was the one part. The second part is that Mzilikazi knew Zwide and the Ndwandwes inside out, because he grew up there. He grew up in the household of Zwide. So he knew the tactics. He knew exactly what they were doing all the time. That is why at one of the stages, it is said that when Ushaka was going to attack, Mzilikazi gave them a song that they were singing. And he taught them a song that was being sung by the Ndwandwes. And when they were singing and getting close to the household of the Ndwandwes, and they heard people singing, they say, "Na baba githi bayeza." And so they put their weapons down to go and celebrate and sing with these people. Kanti bazohlaselwa ke manje. So Mzilikazi played a crucial role in terms of that. And what is interesting also in terms of the espionage and the marking of things that Mzilikazi did is that at one stage, remember Dingan attacked Mzilikazi 3 times. But the 3rd time, when he attacked him, when he was in the Pilansberg area, Mzilikazi made one of his guys to go back to KZN and to go and submit to Dingan and say that, "Hey, Mina, I'm done with that guy. I'm no longer going to fight with that chap. Every time we are fighting and so on," and then he joins Dingan. And then Dingan was very happy that here is a guy who has now escaped from Mzilikazi. He'll give us all the inside stories. Little did they know about Mzilikazi. That guy disappeared at the time when they were going to be attacking Mzilikazi. And he was taking information from there to give to Mzilikazi to say, "The buyers and so. So that's why the 3rd attack that they mounted on Mzilikazi was absolutely useless. It was not as fierce as the first 2 attacks that they mounted on him. So in terms of him and his military strategies, I think he was quite ahead of the time in relation to those people. And that's what helped him in terms of defeating Uzwide.
Thank you very much. Can we have the second question over here?
Okay, so I have a question. So my question is, how did they communicate? You mentioned the part of Moshweshwe and Mzilikazi being friends, and also someone from Europe where they traded guns. So my question is, like, how did they communicate? Because Moshweshwe obviously spoke Sesotho and Mzilikazi spoke Zulu. Yes.
Well, to me, that was actually quite simple. Our languages have got a lot of intersections, and people are able to use them. You know, the question that I'm asked all the time, which I'm surprised has not been asked here, is how am I, a Botswana, writing a story which is related to the Ngunis and Ndebeles and so on. Is it coming? Okay. Now, they managed to communicate very well. Remember, one of the things that used to happen is that Shaka had been, not Shaka, but Moshweshwe, had been for a long time being harassed by Amatiwa no Amangwane. They always used to go there and take cattle and so on. And Shaka ultimately, Moshweshwe decided that no, this cannot go on forever. He sent his men with goats and sheep and so on. He said, go and find Shaka and say, I want to be his friend, so that we can block this Matiwani who's harassing me. And so, that communication would have happened one way or the other. The other thing is that if you know about Mujaji, the rain queen, at one stage there was so much drought in the Natal area. Well, it's called Natal now. No, Natal means Christmas, right? Which I always say to the guys when I go to KZN that you have allowed your province to be called KwaZulu Christmas. You must not blame anybody, because Natal in Portuguese is Christmas. Because Vasco da Gama arrived there on Christmas Day and he put on a cross on the sand and he says, this will be Natal. Till today, that place is called Christmas. Now, the issue is that when there was that drought, Shaka sent his men to Mujaji, the rain queen, to say, please come and help us. The drought is becoming severe. How did that communication happen? Mujaji was Molobedu. And these ones are speaking Zulu. You know, so the communication. If you hear about a man called Muromanyan, have you heard about Muromanyan? Mushom, the mentor ya Moshweshwe. Mushomilena mewe. Mushomilena na lasha masapo. Mushomi, Muromanyan, una lasha masapo. Na khona ho bona thusa batho wa hana mme no a ke bintombazi ke tseba o rata ntombazi ke bua ka mohlomi in Ntombazi. Well, the school is still there in case we can arrange that you can take some courses there. The issue is that Mohlomi walked a whole lot. Actually, he's the one who was making this connection between Bakwena, ba Lesotho, le Bakwena, ba Phukeng. If you hear the praise singings of Bakwena, ba Lesotho, le Bakwena, ba Phukeng, same thing. And Muromunyani says he used to go there, he used to walk to all those places as he was curing people and doing all those sorts of things. And he went to where his great-grandparents came from. Because when they speak of Bakwena, ba Lesotho, ba re ke ba Phukeng, akere, batho ba Phuka. Akere. Kapolehana. Abayo. Oh, okay. Batla nyamela. Yes, so that's the story. African people were always able to communicate in a variety of ways, in different types of ways. The interesting thing, there's a book called The Sight of the Sun at Noon, written by Hazel Crawford. She writes about the Muslim people who traveled along the Gharib. right up until what is Northern Cape. And they say that was the first time they saw people in long dresses here who would come there. And those ones it was worse because these ones were speaking Arab and they were meeting Botswana Batlaping, because Batlaping people were called Batlaping, which were actually a breakaway from Barolong, because they said those ones stayed behind to eat fish, so they were called Batlapi. Now, they were trading with the Muslims, but they say it was a very interesting trade because they couldn't communicate, so the one will come with his goods, put it down, and the other one puts his other goods down, and they sit and they fold their arms. And so if you put one extra bottle, then they know, no, you are interested. But if you just sit and you don't shake, they know, no, this guy is not interested. They take it, they go to the next place. And that's how they were able to trade. But that was in an extreme. But basically, where there were African people all by themselves, they communicated. Make no mistake.
Thank you very much. Can you please have the third question over here?
Okay, I have two questions. Yeah, I have two questions, and then the first one is going to be a bit more clear. Then the second one, I've been trying to kind of like actually conceptualize it into a proper question, but I'm struggling. So it's going to be more of a prompt. Maybe you can address it at the end after other people's questions. But the first one was just, what was your motivation behind specifically Okheta Mzilikazi as your focus for, like you said, 5 years? I imagine that maybe you had some kind of personal stake, or did you just identify, or no, man, there's a gap in this history. So yeah, why did you choose this specifically? What kept you motivated? And then the second question, or prompt maybe for your commentary, is just, now I'm not very very focused on history, or I do IT, so I'm very unknowledgeable. But the more that I'm learning about like African history, I'm seeing that, no, man, beyond having a value within our culture, these are just genuinely interesting stories. There's a lot of parallels that you can draw between what's in the mainstream, like King Mzilikazi, the advisor. There's almost a parallel with that, King Arthur and the wizard that was helping him achieve everything he achieved. When you speak about the people who were told to leave their villages, they are rogues. There's mainstream culture with your Musashi Miyamoto in Asia. So I guess the thought that I'm having for my second question is just, why do you think that now these other things, are making it into like mainstream culture, and they're so big, whereas the same history can be derived from African culture? And do you think that we'll ever get to a point where it's as widespread, Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why I always end up with the second question first. Do you know Napoleon Bonaparte? Do you know the person who was supposed to be Napoleon Bonaparte, the fifth in line? You know about him? Do you know where he died? In Zululand, during the fight that Qwaqwa was wielding, Sandlwana. It's history that is there, but is not kept in the mainstream, because the people who were writing the history had a particular agenda, and that is why our history is not in the mainstream. That Bonaparte's descendant was in exile in France, and when he heard that the English were busy trying their luck to try and depose Qwaqwa, he said, I raise my hand, I will be there, we're going to go and teach that guy a lesson. He was one of the first people to be killed in the war. And that's why the French know that very well, and they have kept it under covers, that notion that that guy was killed there. a young, promising soldier. And almost 1,300 red jackets. You know the red jackets? Yes. Had succumbed at that time in Esandwana to people who were having spears when they were having guns. And they couldn't believe it. It's impossible. He was one of those who didn't believe it, that Bonaparte descendant. It can't be. Guys who are not even having any metal protection or anything, they killed you like that. No, I'm going to teach them a lesson. And he came back in a stretcher, looking at the skies. Now, this history, our history, has suffered the same fate in that it has been almost eroded out of mainstream. Unfortunately, even at tertiary institutions. One of the reasons I didn't do my research through universities is that I would be expected to look at a time period within a certain limit, 5 or 10 years. Now, 5 or 10 years will give me to probably a 6th edition of Peter Becker's book. So I will still be looking at the same books that I had a problem with. I mean, Peter Becker says where Mzilikazi was going, he was tossing children into the fire. You know, that's how cruel he was. And then on the ground, I meet people in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Namibia. They talk about Mzilikazi. They say, no, Mzilikazi used to take children from the royal family. Didn't kill them. And the reason he was taking children from the royal family is that he knew that when he's got those children, if you want to attack that Mzilikazi, you'll be attacking your children also. So it was a strategy for him to say, no, Nina Nhambanam. I mean, there were people that I found there in Zimbabwe who said, the guy said, we come from Botswana. And Mzilikazi had taken our grandparents from there and traveled with them to Zimbabwe via Zambia. And that's how we grew up. And they are still treated as royalty when they go back to Botswana because that history is known and recognized in that way. And out of interest, when I never studied history. I didn't do history at school. In fact, interestingly, when I tried to go back to study history, I went to vets to say, can I register to go and study history? But they said, no, you don't have metric history, you can't do history. I said, okay. If that is the requirement, then I'm out. Because how is my metric history going to help me to be analytical in terms of looking at history in general? It didn't make sense at all. And almost like a man called Motsuku Pegu, if you remember Motsuku Pegu, the former member of parliament and PAC leader. He says in his book called The African Shepherd, when he grew up, he used to love history, but he used to fail it so much. And he says the reason he was failing is that they were expecting him to write the things that were in the books, and he was writing things that he knew from home. And they used to mark him wrong and make him fail. And he said, no, it can't be. That which you want me to write is incorrect. He says, for instance, when the land was taken from them, because he came from the areas of Matabeleland and so on, you know, they are related somehow with Thabo Mbeki, and in fact, Thabo Mbeki's wife, because they come from Lesotho, you know that. So they are somewhat related. And he says, when the cattle were taken away from us at that time, we were given a limited period to say, it's either you eat this cattle or you kill them. Otherwise, we're going to take them from you as we take the land. And he says, now when I go and write my history book, I'm told a different story. I said, no, I can't write that. This is what I know that happened as I was growing up. So when I started studying history, because I used to take the same approach to say that, no, I'm interested in other things. I studied sports science. I majored in English and so on. And I said, no time for history. But afterwards I said, no, man, no. Losing the mark. You know, Marcus Garvey says a man without his roots is like a tree without roots itself. It will die. It's bound to die. Because the roots are absolutely vital for you to be able to get all those vitamins and essential foods for the tree. Hope I answered.
Can we please have the fourth question over here?
Oh, maybe I don't need this. I have a teacher's voice.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nthebe Molope. Molope, yes. I really want to appreciate you for your objectivity in terms of conducting this seems to be undiluted history of ours, because my background is from humanities, even though I branched to education. I'm a linguist by profession. But I studied our history when I was doing my undergrad all the way to honors level. And that's where, then from master's, I did my applied linguistics. And we learned so many things that I later realized on my own that it was his story, not our story. People were writing about us and made us to believe and be convinced that things happen the way they want us to believe. I really appreciate you for even making that statement that you did not go to the university to conduct research because you were going to be fed what we've been fed. Then coming back to my question, I'm Zulu, I'm from KZN, I was born and raised there, even though I didn't grow up there. Then in my studies, from primary education all the way to high school to university, we've been reading books about King Shaka, the formation of the Zulu nation, the relationship with the Mthethwas, the Mzilikazi, when I was doing oral traditions and literature. And there is this burning statement which I refuse to believe now that I'm listening to you and the other readings that I've read, to say that Mzilikazi wabaleka elushaka. Can you elaborate on that? Because it doesn't sound like he really ran away from Ushaka, because it's somebody's story who wants to make us to believe that Mzilikazi ran away from Ushaka. And I also want to applaud you for explaining the issue of the language, because I'm sitting here saying I'm Zulu, and then other people who have written about us, they made us to believe that I'm different from Sotho, I'm different from Tswana, I'm different from Xhosa, because they've labeled us, they've given us these dialects as our names for us to see ourselves as different from one another, whereas we are the same. Now that I've lived here for less than 24 months, I can listen to the Basotho Buaring, and I listen to everything, and I'm like, this is a dialect of isiZulu, this is not a language. But they made us to believe that we are different. This is Msotho, this is Mzulu. And it makes me to fume. But going back to the question, why the statement kept on appearing in so many books to say that Mzilikazi wabaleka, because I want to believe that he did not run away. There is a story. Somebody wanted us to believe that. Thank you.
Yes, I don't know whether Prof has got the book there. I wanted to read for you one line out of the book. Okay, no, I'll recall it out of the head. Where at the beginning where I write author's notes, I state something like that. And it says, and I quote a song by Ziggy Marley. He says, "Black my story, not his story. Now, by Black My Story, you can hear it's actually a play with words, because it's actually saying a black man's story, not his story. He says from education to civilization, from astrology straight to biology, from Marrakesh to Egypt, from Cape Town to Addis Ababa, from Libya to Senegal. He says, you must just follow the black man's story. He says, black my story. Because the other one is his story, which is history. So essentially, that notion of Mzilikazi running away almost immediately gets to be discounted by the name that Amantungwa are known for. One of the names that they are called is Mahlabe Zulu. Now, this is not a coincidence. They're called Mahlabe Zulu. Now, how could they be called Mahlabe Zulu when they were on the run? Beba Shabana no Zulu. And in fact, in the praise singing, they go deeper about it, about how and what happened at that instance. Because, and if you take it a little bit further back to what I was talking about, Mzilikazi basically had been very resolute about the fact that Shaka is his equal. And there is no way that he's going to be continuing to take instructions and being sent left to right and so on. He said that no, we are equal contestants. And what is interesting, like I said, is that Shaka never followed him. All the time. Interesting, Mzilikazi was always planning to say that, what if this man comes after me? But Shaka never did that. In his book, Shaka's Emperor Shaka, Mazizi Kunene says that the warriors, they actually made an opening and allowed for Mzilikazi to escape. And I was saying, well, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. He said they even were whispering, run, for KaMashobane, run. But the interesting thing is that you are sitting with the history that is being narrated around what happened at that time and how is it that Mzilikazi ultimately ended up being totally away from there. What is interesting is that he did not live with all the Kumalos when he left. And Mazizi Kunene continues in his book, Emperor Shaka, to say that even much later when Mzilikazi had left, the Kumalos continued to despise Shaka. He says at one stage they had cattle that they had hidden away in the river, or rather next to the river bench, and they couldn't get them. And so when they came to report to Shaka that, no, we've seen those cattle, can we go and fetch them? He said, no, Amantungwa bayeke. And which was very interesting to show that he had a whole lot of respect for Mzilikazi, even long after he had left. And you know what is interesting? When I was in Zim and I met the descendants of Mzilikazi, they were saying, Zulu have acknowledged, which comes back to your question, have acknowledged the role that Mzilikazi played for them to be a nation. Because can you imagine if Shaka had been killed by Uzwide at that time? That's number one. Number two, the notion of him giving so much inside information and actually being at the forefront and leading in the war. So Zulu, they were saying to me that Zulu have acknowledged that to a point that when the council of Zululand is being made, they consider it to be incomplete if unganamtunga. Right up to the time when Uzwelithini was here, whenever they would have functions, they would invite Amantunga, because they're saying this is an incomplete thing because we actually have. Probably they will then also say Bautongati or Batongabo. They are like this because of them.
much. Nthebe Molope, there was a fifth hand somewhere.
Yeah. Shabwa kakhulu, Nthebe Molope. My question is, how did the clan Mzilikazi become the Ndebeles in Zimbabwe, and also the difference between the pockets of Ndebeles that we find in Mpumalanga, and I think also in Venda, there are people that call themselves the Ndebeles, and also the difference in their language. Yeah, that's it, bro.
Okay, how much time do you have? It's a very loaded question. The Ndebeles, there's a lot of different groupings of Ndebeles. But one thing for sure is that Mzilikazi was not Ndebele. It goes back to what I've been speaking about. This notion of Ndebele was a nickname. They were called Ndebele for a particular reason. I remember when it was during the time of COVID, when I was doing the research at Zimbabwe. And the family, the descendants, were going to fetch me at the airport. And so I was waiting, and these people were not appearing. And I was wondering, what's happening now? It's almost 30 minutes, 35 minutes. Then I got to know later that they were actually depending from Gubo Mapena. Now you know that Abo Mapena, they are Ndebeles. They are descendants of Mhlanga. Now Mapena had visited Zimbabwe at that stage, and when he was supposed to come to the airport with one of the gentlemen to come and fetch me, he then said, Yena is not going to fetch his supporters Mzilikazi. And so I had no knowledge that there were such developments that were happening. And I didn't even know that I was a supporter Mzilikazi. It was the first time I heard it there. So when they get to give me the story, the Ndebeles of the South, let's call them Ndebeles of the South, Abaga Mhlanga, Bomapena, Onzunza, Omanala, those Ndebeles, the one time when they were a unified group of people was under King Msi or Musi. And when Musi died, his children, about 5 of them, were then scattered. There was one of them, once they reached, because they left what is today known as Zululand, actually the place called Mnambiti, which is somehow now called Ladysmith, called by the surname of a person who killed Hinza. Yeah, when I was driving and I was getting lost and I was getting towards Harrismith, I said, please, what is called this geolocator must not take me to Harrismith now. Please, can you take me to some other place? Because you know Harrismith killed Hinza and also cut off his head. And now his wife is also got a place called Ladysmith, Mnambiti. I don't know what is this hero worshipping of people who mess up like this is about. Nevertheless, so in the southern part there, those Ndebeles, right, they broke away from after Msi's death. So there was Nzunza, there was Manala, there was Mtombeni, there was even Sibasa that is been spoken about. That's why when you talk about the vendors, the Ndebeles in Venda, there was also Sibasa, and then there was Masombuka. Now these two, Nzunza and Manala, stayed, but they didn't stay in one area. They stayed as 2 separate groups. The descendants of Nzunza and Manala were uMagodongo and Sibindi, respectively. And when Mzilikazi came out of the Mpumalanga area, he attacked Magodongo in the Cullinan area and killed Magodongo and took his children. And when he went further up, next to what is Mamelodi East, above Valmanstal, he attacked Sibindi. And now, these were two kings. Remember, they were same family, but because of the rivalry, they decided to stay at two different places, one next to Valman, one next to Cullinan. Now, the reason Mabena did not want to fetch me at the airport was that he was saying, Mzilikazi is not a king, he's a warrior. When he came to that area, he found kings. He found King Magodongo and found King Sibindi, and he killed them. And so after he killed them, he captured the Amabuto Wabo and left with them. And Namabuto Kasbindi. So he had so many, because they were fierce fighters. Remember one of the things when Mzilikazi, after he went over Maluti, Katlamba, he found a lot of people who were running away from him when he was approaching Ngepeshu and the spear. And he was saying, but this is strange. Why are these people all running away? Because, because he was a master at this art of war. And so the people that he first met who were then as fierce as him was the descendants of Nzunza, Nagamanala. And those are the people that he conquered. So when they started appearing and coming through to different people, people were seeing Ndebele. And so they were calling them as Ndebele. And if you know the expression, it was especially amongst Basotho and Botswana. What would they say when they see dust, a whirlwind coming up? Huh? Stukutan, yes. But no. They make a different expression. Ma? Yeah, when they see it coming up, when as soon as it makes itself up. But Matabeleland. You haven't heard that expression. You haven't heard that expression. Because whenever the Mzilikazi were attacking, there would be Itun. And they would see through that run for your life. This is them coming. So then, even later, whenever there would be a whirlwind that would start, they say, Kia Matabele. So that, Matabele. So that is what happened then. And that's how they ultimately got to be known as Matabele. But they were not Ndebele. They were Amantunga or Kumar. And hence, even in their praise singings, there's nowhere where they are being acknowledged as Matabele. We'll actually talk about Shaka Zulu, talk about Tua Yinifuti, Abatwagas, Abatwabangan, Abatwabumfas, Abatwagas. So that's the story.
Qwaqwa Campus, this is a conversation that's worth having for a long time. However, due to other commitments, I will allow the last round of burning hands to pose their questions. All right. Tabang, Lihle, Ngaga. Okay, this will be the fourth hand. Can I have the last one if there's any? Okay, I'll be the last one.
Okay, Kalibitso ke Thabang. Oh, stand up. Oh, for the camera. Sorry. My question is based on not only your book, but how we write our African stories. They are more on violence, war, warriors, and not so good stories about us as black people, which also affect how we see things as social scientists, on what we can take from our black history in terms of the good that we have made. I don't think there's nothing that's good that happened in the past. The livelihood was there. There was neighborhood, there was literally everything. But we mostly focus only on the violence, the kingdomship, and everything that has to do with what's bad. And which I feel like it's a narrative that we continue with based on our history as black people in South Africa, or actually in the world. How do we move from here to talk about how we used to plant, how we used to protect ourselves, our skin as black people, what things that can help us in where we are right now, instead of continuing victimizing black people, especially us as black people, based on what has already happened in the past. How do we move forward in focusing on history that will be productive for the next coming generation? It's good, we love it, but how do we move forward?
Okay, the first book I wrote is called An Evolutionary Review on Black Education. And I spent quite a bit of time in that book talking about the things that African people did, the African people discovered, how some of the discoveries that were made by African people were taken and claimed by other people. For instance, in Greece, for instance, in Rome. That you could never talk about architecture without talking about the contribution that African people did in architecture. You talk about medicine. You know that today, if you go and study medicine, you are asked to learn about Hippocrates, right? As a father of medicine, so they call him. But Hippocrates was actually taught by Imhotep, who was from Egypt, was a black man, and is not acknowledged when you talk about, when you read medicine. You talk about Hippocrates. And so this is the whole spin in the history in terms of how things have happened. I mean, I don't know if you know about the mythology, part of the mythology that is sitting in Nigeria. And the only mythology that we mainly get to learn about is the mythology that is coming out of Greek. You know, and so that is what I do in that book. I go into length about that. I talk about the Great Wall of Africa, if you heard about it, in Benin, which when the English came, they destroyed it. And it was made for a particular reason. So in essence, what I'm saying is that it's important that when we look at our history, and we must look at it in such a way that we must be able to acknowledge the things that it actually has done and how it was taught people. Because, for instance, do you know that the British Army, by and large, they acknowledged that some of the tactics that they were using were based on Isfuba Namapondo, you know that, eh? Which was the tactic that was used by Shaka. The chest and the horns, which was what he was doing in terms of encircling an enemy. The British Army themselves, they said so when they were doing some of their attacks during the WW1, World War I. And so it's important that we must give credence in some of those things. Because you see, one thing that I acknowledge is that those 1800s were a very violent period. But what is interesting is that when the people who came firstly to meet Shaka came, they wrote themselves in their diaries that they found the place peaceful, that they found the place clean. But what they don't write, and which is what you will find in the book, is how the war they came with in the Cape was exported into what is now Eastern Cape. And then they started a place which they called British Kaffraria. And then they had Kaffraria. And they had Kaffraria proper I'm not making these things up. It's all in the history, but it's in the history that you will not find. And I'm saying, if we don't write it, who must write it, and how is it going to be written? How are we going to get it? And so, for instance, in European history, you will read about Attila the Hun. And when, in some of the books, and I do that in this book where I compare Shaka and Mzilikazi, and I compare them with Attila, because Attila was a fierce warrior many years ago. But the people who wrote the story about Attila were his enemies. It was not Attila's descendants. And I say in the book that the same thing has happened with Shaka and Mzilikazi. The stories of Mzilikazi and Shaka were not written by his people, were written by his enemies. That is why some of them did not even know what Shaka looked like. But in Tagazel no Ibongo Zaka Shaka, you hear that he was actually light complexioned. And what we are told is that Shaka was as black as whatever black could come. So that is the issue, that we have to be very mindful and careful in terms of how some of these narratives, because they're supposed to be lessons. We are not teaching people about violence. If you want to learn about violence, we can tell you where you can go and learn about violence. Who are the people who are taking people's heads? And keeping them. And what is even more scary is that at that time, the mode of transport were ships. So these guys were moving with the ships, with people's heads sitting next to them and going to Europe with them. It's scary to think about it. So, I mean, I don't glorify violence, but I'm saying that let us be very careful in terms of how these narratives are ultimately turned against us.
Thank you very much, Nthebe Molope. Lihle?
I'm sawubona sis.
Igama nguSaselihle ngwaKhumalo Sibongo.
Mntu.
Yebo baba. And into engilethe la kule ndawo benginesifiso ukuthi uzowenza lento wayenze eBloemfontein. Nethi ngafika late ukuthi uqale umbongo uMzilikazi. So yikho kakhulu okungilethela kule ndawo. So ngiyafisa ukuthi ungithuvala inkonzo ube umbongile uMzilikazi KaMashobane. And then baba, mina my question is if African people like Inkosi uMzilikazi, Inkosi Shaka and other kings were such warriors, how did it happen that Africans were conquered and colonized? And what is the way forward? Because we've had our 30 years of democracy and it's not working out as much as we hope it would work out. So based on our history and where we want to go, how can history help us to fix what we are going through? I don't know if I'm phrasing the question right. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting, because you know, after Mzilikazi fought against the Voortrekker at Vegkop in 1836, the Voortrekkers were very mindful and guarded about going to attack Mzilikazi because they did not know what to expect. You know who weakened Mzilikazi? It was Dingaan. And because Dingaan miscalculated. Dingaan, many people in the area he came from never took him seriously. And in fact, what is interesting is that if you read the story of Shaka and Dingaan, you'll see that the same people who were praising Shaka, as soon as he was dead, they turned around, they said, no, Shaka is a monster. Because now they were trying to protect themselves, because they were worried that we are friends with Shaka. The guy who killed Shaka, if he hears that we are friends with Shaka, he's going to come for us. So almost immediately they said, no, Dingaan is the best guy. They did not even have a clue what Dingaan was capable of, what he would be. They could not even guess that Dingaan would end up killing Shaka. But as soon as Shaka was dead, they said, no, don't trust this guy. This chap is a monster. He's been killing. There's one of the books, in the book I actually say there's somewhere where they say Shaka killed more than 1 million people. And my first question was, what was the population of KZN at that time? Because the biggest population was actually in the Cape and in some area in where they were mining iron in the northwest. Now suddenly, and I said then, okay, let's assume that's true. Then I took that million and I said, let's take this million and divide it by the number of years that Shaka was in power. Because Shaka did not just get into power, he got into power after a couple of years, right? Then I took that number, I divided 1 million by that number. It's amazing, you'll see it in the book. Somewhere it means that probably Shaka was killing a person every 15 minutes or so. So which means the guy was not even eating, was not conversing with people, he was just killing. Wake up, kill. Once another one, which does not make sense. And the other one was saying that Shaka was in charge of an area up to 600 miles. Now 600 miles is more than 800 kilometers, which is beyond Johannesburg. So when did he rule beyond Johannesburg? And these are guys who are said to be experts on Zulu history. And one of them had never even been to KZN. He was an expert of history from London, from his study room. And so these are the things that actually happen with our history. And that's why we must be very guarded about them. And the things that ultimately come out of their pens, which I call magical pens. So, yes, the first thing is that Dingaan was not calculating. He was not like Ushaka and the other people of his ilk. He wanted power, and maybe that's why they call him Dingaan, the needy one. And bekathanda ukuba esigodlweni. You know isigodlo, my son. Leskalara alamazulu nakimzulu. So niyasazi ne yamntunga kumele asazi isigodlo. And now the issue is that Dingaan thought that if he kills Mzilikazi, then he will be the greatest king. But he was very miscalculating, because if he had taken a different route and say, let's make one thing with Mzilikazi, then there would have been a forceful unit. But he didn't see it that way, unfortunately. And it was only after he attacked Mzilikazi that the Voortrekker saw that, no, this man, we can take him on. And when he attacked Mzilikazi, that's when Amanya Mabutho Mzilikazi had actually gone into up to as far as almost Zimbabwe. So which means they knew that terrain. And that's why I also discount this notion that the road to Ntabazinduna was told by Robert Moffat. I said, you're giving the man too much credit. I think you give him lots of credit. Because his son, Robert Moffat's son, was one of the closest friends to Cecil John Rhodes. And they were the ones who were planning to take down Lobengula. Now, how does the guy who's wanted to take down Mzilikazi's son be the same one who was now mentoring and showing Mzilikazi? Mzilikazi knew the terrain well. The fact that he was able to send people from Magaliesburg to Cape Town on foot. Those times. To Andota Hamba. And he even sent the others from Magaliesburg to Kuruman. The first time, yes, on foot. There was no luxurious cell phone. I go for no Robert Lapuzo to. No, you go there and you don't come back without an answer. That's why the guys who went there, they went, and when they were on their way back, apparently some people tried to stop them, and they wanted to fight with them. And Lamabuto Mzilikazi, you know what? These guys, we can finish them. but we don't want to fight with them. Because if we fight them and there gets to be a war, we will not be able to come with the answer from Robert Moffat. So rather, asamben siyocela Robert Moffat to come and talk to these guys, basivulele indlela, basinike indlela. And which was a very, very interesting approach. Because if he was bloodthirsty and all these people were bloodthirsty, they would have finished those guys. And Sol Plaatje wrote something very interesting in his book called Mhudi. He says, because Sol Plaatje was a Morolong, and anyway, Plaatje was not really his surname. It was a nickname again that was given to his grandfather, because they say he had a flat head. And so they called him Plaatje, because you know what Plaatje, Afrikaans, Plaatje is, it's what plat is. So they called him Plaatje. Now, Sol Plaatje wrote in his book that when he was growing up, his parents kept on telling him that Mzilikazi did not just attack people for the fun of it. He attacked them because they had killed his tax collectors, one of them being Mboya. And he said when they got there, when Mboya came to collect tax amongst Bafurutsi, they killed Mboya. And when he heard that, he got furious and he sent them to go and deal with those people. So which gives you a different perspective about this whole notion in terms of how we see them. And maybe to answer the question which never came, Sol Plaatje was Morolong. He wrote about Mzilikazi. Thomas Mufolo was Mosotho. He wrote the story of Shaka. And maybe if we take it even, we try our luck even further, William Shakespeare was English. Most of his stories were written about the Romans. It's very interesting that we don't keep ourselves contained within our own terrains. Try and go out. And you find yourself actually writing a little bit more with less bias, as opposed to when you are writing your own story. Yourself writing that. Yep.
Okay. Thank you for the platform. And Nthebe Molope say, my question is on those people who were joining King Mzilikazi. You identified about two of them in form. There were those who were joining King Mzilikazi in form of providing some sort of leruonyana ke batla ho ba part ya lebotho la hao. So ke batla ho twisisa gona nna ka ba enele eng interest ya bona ene o identify le hape le ya baone ba bona King Mzilikazi ile a warrior e loreng ene fihla e senya dipolekeng tsena le marena. So ha ne ba qeta ho ka o tsholo ha ne ba qeta ho ha qeta ho ba ka mogusu lefatsheng la marena ona nka batho bao e ka ba batho bao ana banka ka tsela e jwang ene bona batho bao e ka ba ne ba sa gore ne ba sa bana le ntho gona nna ba khutlise seo morena Mzilikazi a se entseng ho setjhaba sa bona holo re shebile ho le batho bana be lo reng ba bitswa ke barena ba ne ba lo reng ke ba sebaka.
You know, I'm a mokhatla wa khafela. Ke modibana mo tente morwa mo le ka ntshana ngwana motlhaba mo rudi wa go jwa ke mofulo wa fetoga motho. Bakhatla, one of the things that we have benefited out of Mzilikazi from is that a lot of nations used to play on the Bakhatla land and dominate them and do all sorts of things. But Bakhatla learned out of Mzilikazi that you stand your ground. You just don't allow these things. And it was after Mzilikazi had passed there that Bakhatla actually fought back against the Afrikaners. During the Anglo-Boer War, where I come from in Kgatleng, we are separated from Botswana by a river called Madikwe. Now, Madikwe is a very interesting name because the name of Madikwe was given out of the battles that were fought there. And Lebakwena and Bakwena were defeated. And they say there was so much blood that was actually flowing there that Barke Madi Akwena. And the river was known as Madikwe. Now, when you go over Madikwe, you go into Botswana. And what happened is that when Paul Kruger was in the area of Kgatleng, which is where I come from, he had taken over and he was using people as slaves when he was building up a dam there in that area. The dam is still there to this day. And the men decided that they were not going to be subjected to these slavery conditions in this building of the dam. And then when the current king there, which was Kamanyane, decided to refuse with the men, and when Kruger came the next day and only found women, and the women said, no, we will work. And Kruger looked for the king, got him, and he flogged him in front of the nation. Now that's the greatest humiliation you can have, where you have a king being flogged in front of his subjects. So he was flogged so much that later he died as a result of the wounds that he got there. But then, what then happened is that Kamanyane was then taken in the night, in the middle of the night, and he was taken to an area called Bookela Khosi, where you heal the king. And from there he was spirited out into Botswana. So it was right at the back of the Anglo-Boer War. And at that time, what then happened is that the English people, through a gentleman known as Livingstone, who was a son-in-law of Robert Moffat, incidentally. Livingstone decided to sneak out some guns. And those guns, guess who got them? Bakhatla. And they said, no, we must stand and fight. And so the Afrikaners who were attacking in that area, there's a place called Derdepoort. You know what a poort is? A poort is an opening between the mountain, you know. So in those areas as we're running, there's a Eerste Poort, Tweede Poort, and this one was Derdepoort. So they got the guns from Livingstone and they went to fight the Afrikaners and they pushed them out of that area. And the lessons that they learned was that if you don't stand your ground, then you will always be found to be something to play around with. And that happened as a result of what they had learned, because Mzilikazi had stayed next to that area of Madikwe, an area called Pitsidi Suleyang, and Kgatleng. So there's Kgatleng, two Kgatleng areas. And Bakatla actually even went to go and fight and help Bakwena to fight against Bangwakates. That was all lessons that they got out of that. So it was just a legacy, as you can say. And perhaps maybe there's still a lot of bellicose people who are still left there in this thing. Maybe I'm outside that cycle. But nevertheless, if you know Tauyam Lezan, you've heard about Tauyam Lezan. How it's about Taung? They are in different groups. One of them, Tauyam Lezane actually also went to Mzilikazi for protection, because he found that he was having problems in terms of people who were tormenting him. And so that was the nature, because of the way in which people were living at that time. If you were not able to defend yourself, you had to go to somebody who could defend you. And that's the role that he played. That's why some people actually subjected themselves. Not everybody that Mzilikazi traveled with were people he conquered. Some people, that's why in Zimbabwe today, I know almost every year, it's just that this year I could not go to Muruleng. every year when we go there in Heritage Day, there are Bakatla from Bulawayo who come and join us. But you can hear that it's yes. Those people left with Mzilikazi. We've got where I come from, the place is called Mruleng. What is Murula in Ndebele? The Murula tree. Mgano. Yes, there's a place called Mganwin, which they say it actually came out of the memories of where they came from in the place of Murula, because the Murula tree grows liberally in that area. So yeah, the whole lot of people who actually agreed to go with Mzilikazi is not everybody who was conquered. Some people subjected and gave themselves to say, no, we'll be part of that. We are safe here.
Sekuyini ngathi le ngicela ukuyisho ngesizulu mhlamba kuyona umbuzo icomment kodwa mhlambe izoshintsha nje ibe umbuzo.
Okay.
Ubhuti wami ukuthi usuke wangena emlonyeni lapha ya ekhuluma ngendaba yokuthi the authors of our stories babhala nge-wars, the killings, the defeat. Thina manje siphila la siphikisana nama-feminist. Sifuna ukwazi ukuthi what was the role of women in our history. Ngoba mina, I'm not a feminist. I will die being not a feminist. Mina ngisombokodo. Ayiveli lento siyababona ntombazi. You said something about umkabayi and then who were willing to die for their land, and then balokhane bevezwa nje kancane, and the reason why we hate history and sometimes we hate your writings, I'm not talking about yours Nthebe Molope, but the historians, because nisitshela ngabontate belwa bebulala in thina sifuna ukwazi nge-creation, sifuna ukwazi nge-intelligence that was there, portrayed there in our stories, sifuna ukwazi ngothando lerato. Sithanda bobaba thina ngithi. Kodwa siyitholi leyo nto, kodwa we know ukuthi there was usenza ngasho khona ne side chick yakhe uNandi babethandana, all those things until kuze kube khona thina la there has always been lerato, uthando asilitholi, asilifundi, anisifundisi lona baba.
Okay.
Thina sifuna ukwazi ngoba manje into esehlele kuyona ile ye feminism, silwa nabotata manje ngoba we are angry because we were stupid to choose the wrong ones, and then we end up calling ourselves feminist. And not yo hi ngicela ukuma nje.
Let me answer your question in this way. I don't know how you knew, but my next book is about women. There's the research that I've been doing about women leaders in the continent, from the times in Egypt, from Wenenga, you know that Burkina Faso was actually started off by a woman. The Portuguese out of Angola were pushed out by a woman, Unzinga. Ukempa Vita was Angola, very strong spiritual woman. So yeah, I have deliberately done that. And actually right at the beginning I speak about exactly what you're talking about. To say that in most of the history books, women and children are grouped together as if they are a pitiful group. And we don't take cognizance of the fact that actually Africa for the longest of time was matriarchal more than patriarchal. The Aryan group of people were not Africans. And that's what I get out of that. And I quote a whole lot of people from Sheikh Anta Diop to Credo Mutwa, right the extremes of people, and who talk about the role that women have played and that has been undermined over time. In the first book, I talk about the oldest bone that was found that was used for mathematics, Isango bone, which was found in Central Africa. And they say that the numbering, which are actually prime numbers out of that bone, were found to actually have been worked out by a woman. And it's a very interesting element in terms of that, because I think that book will be very different in terms of from the notion that is there in terms of how women have been looked at and how they have happened to look at themselves. So I have already accepted the challenge before, and I'll be responding to it. Hopefully, if my days are longer, I will have it in April. But if the days remain as short as they are, with 24 hours, then it will probably be later in the year.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nthebe Molope. Before I let you go from the platform, one last question. Where can we get the book and how much is it?
You can get the book from Ubab Mncube. Prof has got the books there. And actually, I said to him that I've got a bit of a soft spot for tertiary students to try and see how we can meet them halfway. Because the book retails at $385. But I was ready to say that we can help and take the students halfway and cut off the 100 Rand. But that will be for when I'm here, because when I'm gone, the book goes back to its original price. The book is going to be available exclusive from the next week or so. And it's available in various platforms. It's already available on Amazon as well.
Molope. Yes, that's the last round of questions.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes.
Uyazi mtunga awusazi isithakazelo samantunga. Senkanyamba yemakhanda khanda esinyelwa inkanyezi zezulu. Awusazi. Uba Mncube bekathe usiphethe lapho uzosenzela sona isithakazelo sakhona. It's quite a lengthy one, but it's very useful. But listen intently. Thank you. Oh, you wanted to.
Kozimangele okhathwe ngezinde izinyawo langezimfisha zanyana owala ukudla umlenze kwabulawayo inyanga abathe bethi fila uzulu kanti ithwase ngonyokana kampeyana ubando abalubande balushiya uzulu unyama yentini yakozimangele inkomo zavula inqaba ngezimpondo oba zavula ingome zahamba untshuntshu kano yanda nondaba inkono evele ngobusemdibini inkomo ethe sagodla eluleka inxele likangoni umahlinzi inja ngezipho ibhidela imnyama ngomlomo elithethwa ngezinyembezi zamadoda umfishane wakithi onjobokazi nyathelwa kanti ezabade ziyanyathelwa ezabade ngushaka kasenza ngakhona ezabade nguzwide kalanga inkwenkweze endele esilimela ilanga elaphuma endlebeni endlovu laphuma amakhwezi abikelana umzaco omnyama oshaya izinkomo washaya amadoda utshani bude busemahalikhali buyothi nyakana bushayo buyosha nemisha yamadoda umhloli wezinkomo ophakemeyo abahloli bezinkomo bezidla nguzishayela imbaba legxakaze ematsheni yesaba inzipho zawo ukonakala kwemba ngomkhonto kwemba ngendungu umabala khophe inkosi yamantungo labethwakazi umhluzi wezingwe lezingonyama unkalo umahamba lugegeza indlini zabo baba wadla inkomo zamabula wadla ezikasidla ngomlomo wadla ezikamlawuda useni wadla ezikamalibaliba bayethe wena wendlovu bayethe mbulazo omnyama bayethe inkosi yohlanga uyingonyama.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for making the time to be present here today. You know, there's one thing that's uniquely beautiful about a small, intimate audience. It's that it allows interaction and it allows to get a sense of where each person is in terms of what they would like to understand. And that has been one of the benefits of being present here today. Siya sitting as Xhosa, sibamba ngazo zozibini bawo. we also have a few phrases that speak to the essence of being here today. One is ingcwaba lendoda liseca kwendlela. What that means is you learn, you grow, and you understand yourself more as you walk the path. So being present here today has allowed us to walk with you the path of Mzilikazi KaMashobane and a lot of the other things that we would love to understand. The other one is igqirha lendlela nguqongqothwane. Simply put, he who walks the road is he who masters it. But we did not have to walk the road of Mzilikazi KaMashobane to understand it, but we were exposed to someone who traveled the length and breadth of Southern Africa to find this history and present it to us in such an intimate and in such a passionate fashion. And for that, the Qwaqwa Campus is very, very grateful. Can you please give him one last round of applause? All right. Now, there's a contemporary phrase, Babu Ncube, that says, it actually comes from a hip-hop song. I believe a few people listen to that. It says, it's better late than never, but never late is better. So what that says is we are grateful to have started this event, although we started it late, and we are grateful to everybody who's present here today who managed to put this event together. With that said, never late is better, Nthebe Molope, but it's better late than never. So ladies and gentlemen, can you please welcome Professor Molope from the Department of Social Work to close the event. Professor Molope, ladies and gentlemen.
Dumelang bana beso. Bekai. Ke kokobetsa pili ha lona fela ore ne ke sa tsebe gore ke tla fitla moraga nako. Impa se ke fihlile ke leboga modimo ke rerisa modimo. Ngicela ukuthi ngikhulume ngesizulu ke angithi siyezwana. Ngiphamele nje mina ukuthi angibonga abantu. Ngifika okokuqala nje lana eQwaqwa angaze ngafika nangi nomngane wami ukhona lapho nzima sengimbona nje okokuqala emva kweminyaka sagcinana. Sithanda ukubonga kakhulu Nthebe Molope on this history that you just shared here. Besilaleleke uhambo likaMzilikazi KaMashobane. Ushobashobana likandaba undaba ezingundaba egudwile usilwane esimnyama isakhwaza kwasungula umthwakazi. Abathwakazi yibo ke laba kade khuluma ngabo la. Uke wabuza umunye ukuthi kuhlukanaphi isindebele nesizulu. Lo kade sipha le inyosi esilo lena ubekhuluma isindebele. Angazi ukuthi nini nemzwe ekhulumana. Kunjalo ke iyo into ekhulunywa ubaba uMlope ukuthi uMzilikazi wayengena umndebele wayekade engumzulu engumnguni kahle kahle angithi abenguni laba isinguni lesi asikhulumayo lana isinguni sihlanganisa zonke lezi ilimi ezikhulunywa manje njengoba nozozwa kukhulunywa KwaZulu-Natal kukhulunywa amaXhosa nakhuluma isinguni amandebele isinguni kanjalo we are a nation kahlonga namaswati yes we are a nation. I'm sure ubaba uMlope ukushilo lokho ne wahlukanisa into zokuthi basibiza ama tribes kodwa kubeni thina siyizizwe. Nayibona into kanjalo kona manje sisihamba siyiqhatsha sithi thina i-tribe yami ile i-tribe yami ile okuyinto nje mayibeka futhi amazwi ahloniphekile athi that is nonsense. Ayikho indaba yokuthi indaba yokuthi siyi-tribe abantu abaqonda ukuthi basinciphise siyibone siyizintwana nje into encane ezingasho lutho kanti thina siyizizwe as in we are nations in our own right. What he was doing, that is a decolonial project. He speaks decoloniality as you listen to him, because if we fail to understand the black histories, unfortunately we'll be forever kept in where we are, in our little corner. Uke wabuza umbulazi lapha uthi if we are born of warriors, why is it that we are now finding ourselves in the space that we are? It's because of colonialism, which was a well thought out project. It was thought out by what today we refer to as cathedral thinkers. Cathedral thinkers are those people who are able to think beyond 1,000 years. So those are the people who thought, if we want to capture and rule the world, we must think of ways and the matrices how this is supposed to be woven, such that even in our absence, these people will worship us. Even if we get just one white person who speaks English amongst a sea of them, they will change their language to accommodate that one individual. Do you understand? So today, those who were pioneers of colonialism are no longer amongst us. We don't even know them. We only know them by name. But the structure that they left is still fully intact. And unfortunately, now we are even defenders of that structure. That's why sesikhuluma naye isingisi manje. No, I'm speaking English because he won't understand me as a Xhosa person. But yet, ushilo ubuze uthema iphendula wathi uShaka wayemuzwa kanjani umshweshwe mayekhuluma. Today we are saying, no, it's convenient to speak English because sibone ngazathi ke iyona into kumele ukuthi siyibambe leyo kanti is still part of coloniality. Do you understand? Sibonge kakhulu Nthebe Molope. I get emotional when I start speaking about issues of decolonization and so forth. Because I see ourselves, actually, we are right deep into it, and there is no way in which we can actually untangle ourselves out of it. But there is a way if there is a will. If we are born of warriors, how come we are not warriors? But there is still that blood in us. We should be in a position to actually take ourselves out of this whole thing. Okay, kulungile. Siyabonga futhi Baba Molope, sibonge Hlongwa. Sibonge kakhulu uHlongwa. She's the one who's is the head of Center for Multilingualism, am I right? Yes, njoba sila eQwaqwa. She's our host. Mhlonishwa, siyabonga ukuthi usiphathele uhlelo. Nabo abamhlophe laba siyababonga. Sinibonga kakhulu. Thank you very much ngomsebenzi eniwenzile. Kubalekile lokho sibabonge. Sibonge kakhulu uLikiti, sicela ukuthi simbonge simshayile izandla bakithi uLikiti. Yes, uye bakithi ugijime kakhulu ngempela kuze kuhlangane lo mcimbi. Uqale wahlanganisa lo wase Bloemfontein besikhona beku last week konje. Yes, njengoba namhlanje sesilana usihlanganisele futhi njena nibona lapha kukhona okuncane okusasojana afuna ukuthi sikuthole mase sihamba ngakho singaphumi singatholanga nje okuncane kuya ngasethunjini angithi siyavumelana ngithi. Yes, ngakho ke siyabonga kakhulu. Thank you very much for coming, and again ngixolise ngokufika ngemva kwesikhathi kusuke nje wagejana nje lapha nalapha izinto kodwa ngiyabonga ukunithola nisekhona. Thank you very much.